So jumping in, session goals, we want to set the context for conversation. We'll start with some sample research on campus and other conditions related to pride and equity. And then we want to talk about informing, advocating, and advancing through our collective efforts. So we'll share some things that you're doing already. We'll also talk about some next steps through this session or dialogue or goals that you might have as well. So let's go ahead and just do a quick exercise here. We'll do an answer garden, and some of you may have experienced this before. I'll jump to the link and you'll get the link into the chat as well. And you'll join me in your browser, and this is what you'll see. And with an answer garden, what you'll do is just put in 1 or 2 words. I think I've put a limit of 20 characters, and you can contribute as many times as you want, and you'll get this live tag cloud of what the group has contributed in, as far as terms. So what terms come to mind when thinking of pride? Here we are in Pride Month. So what comes to mind for you? And feel free to just let it flow. And I'm always anxious to see the first words. Okay, it's working. People are in there. Great. I love that. Inclusion, love, respect, affirmation. Awesome. Keep piling them on there. And with Answer Garden, that's something that we'll refresh, I think, about every 30 seconds, but I'll probably do it about every 10 seconds because we're not going to drag on that long here. We just want to do a quick check-in. How's the group feeling today? What words are coming to mind related to pride? And we're seeing some of those initial words repeated, and so getting larger. Great. Love hashtag my son. Awesome and creative there. Okay, good. We're seeing all positive terms. That's nice. Wasn't sure necessarily. Because obviously pride is a very, very positive concept, but we'll talk about some of the things going on that aren't always positive, of course. Well, rainbows sneaking in there, coming out to the front. Feel free to comment in the chat if anything is standing out that is a surprise or lacking. Love it though. And we always make these available. We'll talk about at the end of the session what's available to you afterwards as far as recording slides, et cetera. So you'll have a list of all those things. You'll have access to this ongoing. If you haven't used Answer Garden before, it is an easy and free to use tool. So I suggest that if you want to do any sort of opening of dialogue for your courses, then you can put up a prompt and easily do this in a synchronous type session. It'll work asynchronously, but it's really good for a live session, just doing a checking in with the group, taking the pulse, if you will. All right, great. One last scan here, and then we'll move on. I just want to see what else the group is thinking of. Acceptance, respect. So many powerful and important terms. Great. This would be like the most delicious alphabet soup ever. Love this. All right, so let's move back to the presentation. And let's just do a little bit of checking in. This is not going to be a history lesson whatsoever, and I don't consider myself to be an expert in this domain. I do what efforts I can within my role, but I just wanted to do a little bit of a scan for context on what is meant by pride. Originally, that was an acronym, Personal Rights in Defense and Action, back in 1966. That movement was much more overt than its predecessors, tapped into younger, more energetic constituents. And of course, the event that most people are aware of is the Stonewall Rebellion of 1969 in New York City, and how the riots triggered that and triggered a much more galvanized movement going forward, stronger and stronger building through present day. And then that's led to, pride being something that's more apparent. It's marketed more, it's commercialized more. I think there's a lot about that that's great for those who understand it and do it in a particular way and stand behind it. There are certainly some companies and others that would be jumping on the bandwagon, so to speak, because now there's enough movement and awareness where that's an opportunity of Pride Month. Oh, we need to push Pride and we have Pride on everything, but what efforts underlie that to really support Pride going forward? So we always look at that as well. A little bit, there's progress that's been made over the last, 50 years in particular, but still certainly progress to be made. As I looked at some of the statistics over the last few weeks and some of the ones that stood out to me to say, there's really a lot more to be done. 64% of college students said there's significant discrimination against LGBTQ students. That rises to 75% when you ask that subpopulation about how they feel about discrimination. So that's coming from a 2019 study. So vast majority there. LGBTQ students, or individuals, I should say, 4 times more likely than heterosexual peers to experience violent victimization. Even more recent on that, UCLA School of Law. And then similar to that 4-to-1 ratio, we see 71 victimizations per 1,000 people in LGBTQ versus 19 per 1,000 for non-LGBTQ. So still a pattern that we don't like to see, but progress being made for sure. So a lot of work and focus and attention to be done, and we'll start bringing that into our classroom campus environments. Because I know, to let you all know as an audience, we have a mix of faculty developers, faculty, administration, staff. We have folks on the academic affairs side, the student affairs side, and others. And so we want to make sure that the conversation is not just about the classroom, but that will be kind of our central component, and then also talking about beyond that on the campus. So a little bit more on trying to make progress. So we still have a surge of anti-LGBTQ laws in place and in action. 15 regarding access to healthcare, bathrooms, and certain types of education approved in 8 states since January of this year. And then 11 similar laws awaiting a governor's signature. So still a lot in certain places where there's not been as much progress made. And in some cases, maybe some going backwards in recent years. So how do we address that? How do we keep having that conversation? But to kind of shine a light on something that's positive, I'm sure most of you saw that a week ago, the Supreme Court has upheld rights for LGBTQ plus people to live and work without fear of harassment and exclusion. This comes down to the Secretary of Ed, Cardona, saying that Title IX is critical. It is to be enforced going forward, so that all students, all rights are enforced, and all forms of sex discrimination are eliminated as much as possible. So that's something positive that was just in the last week, and that's something that, as we were in preparation for the session, so that was a nice addition to see that. Okay, so let's talk about ensuring the student experience is LGBTQ plus inclusive. And now we're going to jump to Padlet. I think by now, most people are probably familiar with Padlet, but let me take us there. You'll get a link into the chat at the same time. So again, we're going to join each other in the browser. I'll have it on my screen and you'll have it on your respective monitor as well. And then what we want to do with Padlet, a lot of different ways you can use these, but for today, what we're going to do is just focus on 1A and 1B, the first 2 columns. So in what ways do you ensure courses are inclusive? This is whether you're an instructor, an instructional designer, or playing another support role to the courses. Are you working at the program level or department level, whatever it may be? And so I see some contributions already, great. Proper training for all staff. Yeah, so I'm curious about, okay, training to what level, what types of things? Is it awareness? Is it actual tools and techniques? So great, people can add that. Gender neutral pronouns. Column 2, for those that may be less in the classroom context, what are some things that you're doing to support this inclusivity in the campus environment? And we'll get to number 2, the 3rd column, later. So let's just look at the first two columns and see what's coming up. And B's, feel free to chime in as well if you'd like. Meaning on any of the comments, if anything resonates with you, feel free. You don't have to wait your turn as far as slides.
No, it's fine. I just love watching it roll in. There's going to be some common themes for sure.
Yeah, so pronouns have come up a couple times and different ways where students can identify. So I see LMS. We'll talk about one way that we do that in our courses or offer a resource for that to happen. And let me scroll down here as first column goes down longer. Great, pronoun and name statements. Incorporating queer folks into the curriculum. We'll talk more about that. That's great. Gender restrooms. We'll talk about that. Content and imagery, yes, great.
Yep.
More on pronouns.
I think our work is done, Brett.
Yeah, there we go.
Everybody's already doing it.
Yeah, oh, well, yeah. We'll see. We've got how many people? 45, and we've got 10 comments. Probably some that are waiting to hear more and getting ideas for sure. But I know we have people who are definitely at the forefront of this here today. So I'm just looking at the second column then. Maybe it's less classroom related. Let's see, reflections, thinking about LGBTQ students. Effects on schema, great. In conversations and meetings, okay. Welcome meetings, sense of belonging, great, and safety. That's huge, and we'll be getting to that in some techniques. Name changes in LMS, yeah. I know everything has always been so locked down as far as students and how they're in the system and how that follows them in a very fixed way everywhere they go. And so there's more flexibility now. Proper training. And I imagine that's for, faculty, staff, administration. Great.
And things constantly change, right? I mean, what we're saying today, give us a couple months or a year or two, and we're going to be seeing even more.
Yeah, great. Gay Straight Alliance on campus. Training about safe spaces. Okay, good. So this is a good scan here for what people are already doing. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to ignore column 2, or the third column, I should say, number 2 for now, because we're going to get to that a little bit later. So we'll come back to that because we'll set that call to action based on some things that are talked about and shared today and what you see as your next steps. Okay. So what I'll talk about briefly is how we use a framework called Purposeful Learning and how that speaks to equity, inclusion, and pride. And that's something that's very clear in the work that we do through O'Donnell Learn and this Purposeful Learning framework. Just to give you a little bit of context, you have these 8 elements that you see on the screen here. And behind that, we've got 30 objectives, if you will, embedded across those 8 elements. And what that does is it serves as a framework for an instructor, or maybe it's an instructional designer, to be able to look at a course as it's being developed or as it's being assessed and think about, okay, how well is it meeting these target areas? On the left-hand side, you see things that are more structural, functional, and people can relate to those pretty easily as planning elements and implementation elements. But on the right side, we really have this strong balance on the social and personal and humanizing, that the course needs to be a community, that it needs to be accessible, and that's all forms of access, that there be equity and inclusion for all learners, that there's that sense of welcoming and belonging. So this is a framework we've developed that we've seen like no other that I've looked at, that really rounds out things and places a strong balance toward that humanized element. So ways that we focus within that, just waiting for my slide. It's doing a little bit of cross-loading. Let me back up. There we go. All right, it's skipping a slide for some reason. Let me see if I can solve that. I'm just going to exit out. And if I have to, I'll go this mode. Try one more time. My apologies. So one of the things we work on is, and I've probably been doing this for 15 years, I've been on this syllabus campaign or rampage at some points, where I just see so much more potential with the syllabus to be this speaking document that connects to students. And so we talk about format, we talk about tone even being important, and there's some great research about tone of the syllabus and what that does for student connection and them feeling welcomed and able to ask for help. This is just a sample of an inclusivity statement from Appalachian State that I love. And I won't read it to you. I'll pause for a few seconds and you can scan it and see some great context here that's in addition to a syllabus. And in the chat, I'd love to hear any of your reactions to this. How do you feel about this as a type of statement to include in your syllabus or to suggest for faculty? Do you include something similar? How might it be different? Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and move us on from there, and you'll have access to this statement and would be able to definitely move on further. Another thing that we do that relates to many important elements of your course is starting with learner empathy. And so by doing this with our instructors that we're working with, by starting with learner empathy, we really flip things into the student perspective. And that's powerful when you can get an instructor to start thinking more from the student perspective. I mean, truly grounding it into who the students are and what they need. And of course, needing to meet the student learning outcomes, but it goes beyond that as well. That's the grade. But really thinking about learner empathy, we start with that. And it's really about Maslow before Bloom's, is you've got to set up certain levels of meeting those needs before they can move up Bloom's and even get to that point. So really checking in with where you are on that learner empathy map. And so we do that exercise with them. It works really well. And I like the comments I'm seeing about the syllabus. So we'll definitely keep track of those as well. And folks from my team, feel free to chime in while I kind of keep us going a little bit here. Another thing that we think is really important as a technique, and some of you touched upon this in that Padlet a moment ago, is how do you connect early and often with your students? And so we've developed this learner connectedness survey, and this is just one of 6 pages on that form. It only takes students maybe 5 to 10 minutes to complete. But the first thing it does is it asks them about their name and identity. And these are some of the things we have there as examples. First, I want to note that this is not a requirement of students. They don't have to complete this, and they don't have to complete every item. If there's something they're not comfortable sharing, particularly on the second page when we ask them more about their background, their goals, where they feel strong as a learner or maybe weaker as a learner, their situational factors related to access and work and their environment that they're in as far as them taking this course. But really even just starting off with name, identity and addressing that is huge. And that can really prop things up within this context. So we have the link there where that link will elicit a copy of this survey for you, where you can then adapt or adopt as you see fit. You won't be using our form and it won't be going into our database. You'll be able to use it on your own instances. And that information that students share only goes to you as an instructor. It doesn't go to their peers. So that's important to note as well. So you do have the link to that in the chat, and you have the QR code if that's useful. Are some of you using a learner connectedness survey or something of a different name? And if you are, is it touching on the elements of identity? I'd be curious to know there. Yes, using it, but maybe not touching identity. So yeah, this could be something to consider as an addition. Great, thanks, Kate. We're starting to see more faculty adopt something similar. Great. And again, because you have the editable copy, you can make it your own, have it fit your needs. But it's a good start, and it's based on some other models and some research that I looked through over the last couple of years in developing this. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about connectedness through learner identity and expression. So, oops, let me back up and turn it over to Bees. So Bees is going to just say next slide, and I'll keep us moving here, and I'll look at the chat a little bit more.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brett. So if we're going to focus on, for our purposes today, gender and sexual orientation, it's probably a good idea that we start with a common understanding about what those are. So if you can go to the next slide, Brett, to our genderbread person. I love this. And this is, again, a great way to connect with your students or with your faculty, your student affairs folks, because it helps to break down.
My apologies.
That's all right. It helps to give a really basic understanding of these terms and these concepts, because it's highly complex, but the genderbread person breaks it down. So if you were taught to talk about like gender identity, that's really how you perceive yourself. So I identify as female. I identify as a woman. But if you were to pop around over to the expression and how I demonstrate my gender, I'm much more masculine. You saw earlier from 20 years ago, my hair, how I dress, my interests, right? So that's how you express your gender. And it's not based on your biological sex or how you're born. And along with attraction, it's what is your sexual interest or your romantic interest? And again, that's not related to gender. So the genderbread person is a really great tool to use. Like I said, in talking to your students and talking to your faculty to get at something that's highly complex. Brett, if you go to the next slide, please. So once you get that, a common understanding of the terms gender, sexual orientation, and if you're looking to do an inclusivity audit, maybe with your programs or your faculty, I want to give you a case study of how I talk about gender and sexual orientation with my faculty. I was a department chair, and so I would go into and do the annual classroom observations. And one of the ones I was really looking forward to is going into one of my sport management classes. And so one of my faculty, I loved him. He identified as male, cisgender, heterosexual. He was one of the football coaches, so he knew a lot of the students on campus. And the class I was going to go into and observe was probably 80% male, and 100% of those students were on some sport team, right, at the college. So in some ways there was diversity, but it was really a homogeneous. And I knew I was going to be able to go in and really explore the images and the content that he was giving to his students, and trying to determine, where could he be more inclusive with who he was and how he presented. So if Brett goes to the next slide, please. So if I had to offer, this was a composite of the images that the students got that day and the language that he used. And maybe in the chat, if you would, what do you see? Who do you see? And in addition, who don't you see? Who might the students, or what images or what experiences of humanness might be missing from the class? Yep, mostly men in the images. Yeah, and one woman. And what we know is, in terms of when we talk about gender and gender expression and the images that our students see, is oftentimes women are super hyper heterosexualized, right? And so Brandy Chastain with taking her shirt off, that wasn't a moment in a joy in sport for many people. It was, wow, hot chick took her shirt off. Woohoo. Yep, masculinity. The textbook that's used is Foundations of Sport Management. And that one, what's interesting is somewhat of a typical textbook. And each chapter was given to either women in sport, race in sport, disability ability in sport. And so they weren't connected. So the students weren't able to really see this interconnectedness. You all also notice that these are highly elite athletes. They're all able-bodied. And the language that he used was, hey guys, hey fellas dudes, and let's talk about the Super Bowl today. So the students were missing out on a lot. So when I sat down with this professor, I went through, I talked about my notes, and we then went into what are some changes you can make. So Brett, if you go to the next slide, this is going to lay out some of the things that I talked with him about in a very kind and gentle way, right? There was no malice from his point. So we talked about the language that he used. Yeah, he used the generic guys to refer to his entire class. It was also, I talked to him about who he engaged and who he didn't engage in terms of his students. And his comfort level was with those football players in the class. And so that's who he engaged with. And he was missing, half the other students in the class. We talked about the pronouns, right? And so if I had had the learner connectedness survey to offer to this faculty member, he definitely would have gotten a better picture of who his students were, not the assumptions that we were making around how students identify. The bathrooms facilities in this particular building were not gender neutral. And so we talked about, he may want to bring this up in class. And sadly, a student who may not feel comfortable in using a men's or a women's restroom is going to have to go across campus. In the images, and I said, you amp up your images. You need to give them a whole lot more, and those that they probably have never seen and may never see again, and talk about those. And then I think the biggest impact was around when we talked about how he could queer his materials. And really, queering is about providing difference or looking at difference. And so the Counting Coup and Man in the Middle, those two images right there, are textbooks that we talked about him using rather than the textbook that was the standard. Counting Coup was really, it's a book of a young woman who plays basketball on the Little Bighorn Reservation. So you've got the intersection of gender, sexuality, and race. Man in the Middle is John Amiche's book, and John Amiche is the first professional basketball player to come out as gay. And he came out after he was done with his career. But both of those texts get at anything you would want to talk about in that class in terms of content, but the centeredness of gender and sexual orientation is there. The students were also introduced to the gay games. They had never heard of the gay games before, and now it's part of the classroom. And then the IPC is the International Paralympic Committee. The students know about the able-bodied Olympics, the Special Olympics. Many of them didn't know about the Paralympics. So they were starting to get into, again, other ways of being and doing sport. So if Brett goes to the next slide, these are just suggestions and samples of how you can queer pretty much any class, any curriculum, from chemistry to health sciences. If you were teaching history, right? If you were to consider it from the perspective of the queer community as the center around which, other histories happen, it is really a great way to expose your students, and also helping students understand that there are other professional organizations that may appeal to them, such as Women in Computing or SOCNIS. And just for your classroom's sake, the little image at the bottom right is, when your students are going to work in groups, be purposeful about making them as mixed as possible. That former faculty member, he enjoyed doing days where it was boys versus girls. And I was like, no, let's mix it up a little bit. So those were some of the thoughts I had for other content areas. And I think the next slide, Brett, is we can explore what some of the attendees are experiencing.
Yeah, let's hear from you with your courses, or as you're observing others, working with others. What are your experiences like? Interactions, materials, language, all of those things. And Bees, while we're waiting, you used terminology on a cisgender, in case anybody doesn't know what that means.
Oh, does anybody want to offer what cisgender means in the chat? And cisgender's got some controversy around it as well. Gender is non-specific. I know some of my Colorado Mountain people know this. Yeah, it's identifying as a gender you were born with. And so cisgender or transgender. And does anybody have any other examples? I gave you this, the sport management example, and where you've been able to, queer your materials in maybe a chemistry class or a business class. If you want to respond to that in the chat. On your IT site. That's great. Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, how so? Anything else you can share?
We've had to get the white males off the pages.
Mm-hmm.
And you want those images to be authentic, right? Sometimes if you go to some colleges where they're really trying to force it and you're like, yeah, I bet those aren't your students. Yeah, more women, more color. Nice. Business school faculty have
Oh,
identified LGBTQ plus. That's great. And think of internships and placing students. Mm-hmm. Transgender speakers. Mm-hmm. And allowing, having that safe space for students and or faculty to be authentic with who they are. I don't know if in that class with that particular faculty member, any student who identified as trans or anything other might not have felt comfortable, right? Because he was almost creating like a locker room experience. Again, no malice. But we definitely had to deconstruct that, and we talked about it, and he was open to it, and he just didn't realize it. So back to you, Brett.
yeah, let's pause on a couple of these. If you see, is it BD? BD's question.
Can you say a bit more about the difference in your sport management between inclusive practices and equity? That's a really good question. So what does it mean to be inclusive, and what does it mean to practice equity? So inclusive is, are my images there? Are all my students there? Are they sitting around the table? And then, do they feel welcome? Do they feel like they can contribute because of their difference? I may have a very diverse class. They're all there, but some of them may not be having that similar experience. They're not heard, they're not listened to. So it's really, I don't think that's really might not have answered your question.
Yeah, and in general, equity being that everybody's kind of going to get the same treatment, same opportunity. Being inclusive is really making it so that the experience includes everybody around the full spectrum, and also gives people choice at times for ways that they might do assignments. So yeah, equity is just everybody's getting the same thing kind of down the middle, where inclusive is going to be more broadly representing everybody and including everybody in different ways.
And amen, Sandy. I was just about to say, also, a dangerous practice is tokenizing your students. And maybe calling the only student of color out and asking them to speak. So tell us, how do African Americans feel about this? Yeah, don't do that. The same with trans, and just really making it about it's bigger than the individual. It's so important to the individual, but to never put your students in that position.
And for those who aren't directly in or connected to the classroom currently, I want to make sure that you feel included in the conversation. Are there other things that we haven't brought up that are significant issues or activities? I want to make sure that your role is represented here, or any questions you might have, comments to make. I like that, Linford. Thank you.
Do any of you have a rich student organization or even faculty organization on your campus that?
I see Sandy comment. Yes. Another instance of being a token, just because you check a box, therefore that's now been covered or included in a process. Yeah. Yeah, more on equity versus equality. Yes. Again, equity is the baseline. equality is more meeting individual needs. Okay, just kind of checking the pulse of the chat. Let's see, another post here real quick. Yeah, I like that. Okay, good, good. And so that's, again, thinking of learner empathy. So I'll have to look for that. That was this past week. All right. All right, so let's tip a little bit forward here and recommendations to make a difference. You know, we had a dialogue. We tried to have a dialogue with everybody, just trying to see, you know, what's resonating, what are you doing, what are some of the key issues that you see out there. This is just a quick capture. This is nowhere near a complete list. Sorry about all the text here, but just grabbing sort of some of the main ideas of what people are doing, particularly during Pride Month, and just give you an opportunity here to scan. And then, are there any other things that come to mind that your campus is doing to make a difference? Good. So UCF has got a lot going on through academic affairs, diversity task force. And, you know, while people are looking at this and things going on in the chat, you know, whenever looking at different topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, I've seen the pattern where campuses will hire a diversity officer. Let's say it may have a different title, but somebody's assigned to taking care of that, leading the charge for that. But I've also seen often that person kind of resides in one particular corner of the campus, tucked away. They're doing a great job. They're having the conversations, but it doesn't always get into the classroom level. It doesn't always get into that, you know, teacher to student practice and interaction mode. And often it's related more to campus entities, outreach, and things like that, and the environment, which is great. But I see it falling short oftentimes in getting into the classroom practice, which is the main experience for students, I would argue. But I am certainly biased given my faculty background. But so are people finding that your efforts on campus are really getting into that? Or is it still sort of at the, I don't know, higher or broader level? Glenford, that's awesome. Moderating an event today. That is awesome. DI curriculum to address exact, yeah. So, yeah, that's great.
And I think it's really about culture. It's not the one-offs or the one-hit wonders. It's really about, you kind of hope that at some point it's like a fish having to describe water. You just can't. It's just part of everything that you do, right? That your upper administration at the beginning of Pride, you know, puts out a statement that, you know, it's just part of everything you do and not the add-on.
Yeah. And then ways to get it deeper into the classroom is, you know, things that I've been involved in, and there are other ideas as well, and people can share them. You know, maybe having a faculty learning community that really takes a deep dive into transforming courses. And then using that to then have examples. And sometimes you might, you know, have representatives from different colleges coming together and different disciplines talking together, and then they'll then dive into their course and make changes to their course. And then they're able to share those examples out. Those courses can be shared or presentations can be made. You can have video case stories developed on the transformation of that course and what it's done to be more, how it's now more inclusive. So those are some examples. And of course you can have presentations, open forums, workshops, and things like that. But if you want to kind of have faculty roll up their sleeves and go deeply and serve as models, then a faculty learning community is a great way to go. And I don't know if anybody here, maybe you've tried something like that. And a faculty learning community is often something that will run across the entire academic year And there might be monthly meetings to really focus on elements and make changes along the way. And then being able to kind of document, if you will, and track those changes. And even doing some data collection before and after, and even doing some scholarship of teaching and learning. So there can be a lot of great outcomes in doing that and reasons why faculty might get involved.
Yeah, and it's also about where your diversity officer is housed. An example of a diversity officer actually being in the human resources department, and that created some issues.
Yeah, and I see Heidi's comment. Yeah, hopefully I'm not sounding critical of diversity officers in similar roles. They have a big task, but how can they be enabled and part of that conversation related to instruction? Cliff, okay. Ooh, thank you, Cliff. Okay, look forward to checking that out. So if folks haven't seen in the chat, Cliff did do an FLC or faculty learning community and has a video posted at their site, teaching.temple.edu. So grab onto that. You know, if you want to do a save of the chat, or you can copy and paste that or go to your browser. Kim's got a faculty team going right now. Awesome. There are 9 of them. And with faculty learning communities, 6 to 12 is a good number range of people. Less is too small. You're not going to get a diversity of voices. It's easy for 1 or 2 to dominate. You know, 9 to 12 is a really good number. You get a lot of cross-disciplinary representation, background sharing approaches. And this is for all course modalities. We're not even mentioning particular modalities because it applies across the board. Great.
Yeah, and Alicia, I wholeheartedly agree with you. This is really about intersectionality. We have, have identified gender, sexual orientation here, but you can't pull those pieces apart, right, and totally get at it. And individuals of color, again, disability, ability status, socioeconomic class, education, all of those things, like, really make this way more complex. So we can't forget about the experiences of queer students who may be first generation, poor, et cetera, right? We just can't say, oh, let's address your queerness and we're good, because that's not it.
Great. And I know it's just a technical item. If folks, make sure you are sending to panelists and attendees. So in the chat drop down at the bottom, you'll see you can do panelists and attendees, so everybody gets your post. Some of them are just going to panelists, which unfortunately is the default setting. I see a request from Sandy. If Cliff, if you have a direct link to that video, that would be great, just so people could get to it more easily. I think Sandy's already tried and maybe isn't finding it right away, and others may have the same issue. So let's see, Equity Fellowship Committee, love that. And okay, Amy's got a link to a video there. Okay, awesome. All right, so what we want to do now is start thinking about, okay, from here, from this conversation and going forward, what are some of the things mentioned today, possibly by myself or Bees, but certainly across the board, across the group through chat, Padlet, Answer Garden. Now looking at column 2, if we go back to the Padlet that you have in the chat there, just focusing on the 3rd column, I should say, number 2, call to action. So going forward, what's a new idea, task, technique, resource that you want to go after? The more webinars, great. And I see the fellowship model mentioned there as well, a safe zone initiative. And I'll scroll as we keep getting things in that column. Yeah, so awareness, what could that look like? What would be the process? What would be the content? Would you create an awareness module? Would it Would it be, where would that be based? That could be an important thing. Is that going to be based again in HR? Is it going to be based in the Center for Teaching and Learning maybe? My bias certainly is toward the latter, because if you're wanting to impact teaching practice, then great. Or could it be something that's you know, a co-hosted resource? But I think where that resides and how it's promoted is huge. So provide ideas and suggestions for items like the syllabus statement, great. Learner connectedness survey, again, those are good things that you can adopt and adapt easily.
And always thinking of, you know, what's the hook for people? A lot of times, you know, like-minded people, we're all in the same boat. We're preaching to the choir. You know, how do you get those that this is a, you know, highly off the table subject? And it, at least for me, it always comes from what's best for our students. How do you impact student learning and the student experience? And it's truly understanding all of our students. And you may be uncomfortable with it, and you may think my brain isn't wrapping around this, I don't understand it. Well, the more it takes for us to understand it, the more students we're losing, right? And because they can't wait for us to be ready.
Great. Checklist or eval of online courses. Is this something that is a component or topic within maybe an existing checklist rather than a separate checklist? Again, that helps to make it more incorporated and part of, you know, a primary effort as opposed to an add-on. So that's something to consider as well. And again, going back to humanizing your courses, being inclusive, class as a community for everyone, where everybody has something to contribute, and they contribute it through their own individual experiences and identities. And feel free in chat, you know, if not a call to action item, in chat, if there's anything that you have as a question. We just have a few moments left. Are there any closing questions? I'll take us back to the slides and pause there for a second, and then we'll go into wrap up. But any other questions or comments? How to be clearly identified as an ally. Great. Think of, and these, I'm spinning on things. I'm going to let you go on that one, because I've seen you do that for a long time.
Yeah. So Tracy, you're saying so that your visibility as an ally is somewhat of being a quote unquote safe person. I mean, if so, the the safe zone, safe spaces, allyship programs, you know, not trying to, you know, like you don't have to wear the rainbow flag all the time, but there's some things that you can just let your students know that, hey, I'm here and I'm with you.
Yeah, I think again, through the syllabus, you know, that again, the syllabus has so much potential to make that connection from you, through the course to your students. And you know, as you do a welcome video, there are certain things you might say in your welcome video so that students are going to feel a sense of welcome and belonging. You're not just this authority there to make sure, you know, they're up to par, and you're not there to, certainly not there to weed any people out or exclude anyone. So I think just in the way you present yourself and how your syllabus speaks, you know, even, you know, office hours, addressing things like pronouns, having that inclusivity statement, and it was Tracy, yes. You know, and I'm focusing on classroom and with students directly, how to be identified as an ally. There are also certainly other ways you can do that on the campus in your community. Great, thanks, Cliff. And I know, okay, we'll wind down here. Keep submitting anything in the chat if you would like to. And let's go on to just a look back. So as takeaway resources, you will have access to the slides and the recording of the session. The Purposeful Learning Framework that I mentioned earlier on with those 8 elements, again, a lot of the social and humanizing elements on there. You'll have access to that, and within will be the 30 objectives that can be used as self-checks and guide points. It's not meant to be evaluative, it's meant to be more iterative. That empathy map exercise, the learner connectedness survey you got access to, but that'll be in the slides as well. The genderbread resource inclusivity audit, the answer garden, if you wanted to go back and capture anything from that, use that image. And then the Padlet, if there were any contributions from your peers through those Padlet activities, then you've got access to that ongoing as well. All right, well, we'll close the formal session here. Thank you everybody for attending and participating. It's great to have you. And just want to wish you all the best going forward with these and other efforts. Keep doing great work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody for the conversation today.